Before this episode begins, we want to give you a trigger warning. We want you to know that the content of this episode speaks to pregnancy loss and miscarriages and/or a viable pregnancy. We understand this content may be triggering to some of you, and you may wish to save this episode for another day. Remember, your emotions are valid, and we encourage you to take care of yourself and reach out to reliable resources for support when you need them. There is so much more that you're doing. So tell us about your advocacy work.
Yeah, that's honestly has been the most healing for me. And it's not for everybody, but for me, advocacy was a huge turning point. So there was finding you, and then my Instagram account and advocacy. Those were the three things that really helped me on my journey with coping with what I was going through. And advocacy evolved from my infertility account and hearing all the stories of so many people who were messaging me saying, "How did you afford IVF? I can't even afford a funded cycle in Ontario because my doctor says I might need 10 grand or more for meds and testing and things that are not covered." And it just broke my heart. How many people are going through infertility in Ontario, some that have never even spoken to a fertility doctor because they know they won't be able to afford it. And it's just mind-blowing, and I don't know that the statistics actually would reflect all that, but Conceivable Dreams, which is the Ontario fertility patient nonprofit advocacy group, did do a fertility patient survey to try to capture some of those statistics.
Hi, superhumans. I'm Dr. Mavis Garcia.
And I'm Dr. Wise.
We're two of the physician leaders at Markham Fertility Center, otherwise known as our baby, MFC.
As fertility specialists, we've witnessed firsthand the challenges, triumphs, and the myriad of emotions that come with trying to conceive. Whether you're just starting to think about having a baby, actively trying, or facing challenges along the way, My Fertility Podcast will be your go-to resource for honest conversations and a supportive community.
So grab a cup of coffee or tea and settle in, and let's demystify the world of fertility together. Today, we have a very special person on the podcast. We have Renee Higgins. Renee is my patient, but most importantly, she's a fertility patient that has done so much work in advocacy, trying to make IVF accessible for everybody in Ontario, as well as share her story on Instagram to help many patients in her situation. Her journey with infertility was long and painful, and she shares that journey with us today. She talks about her diminished ovarian reserve and being what she calls the worst of the worst prognosis, and how she was able to turn that around and have a success story that she's sharing with us today. For those of you who don't know, diminished ovarian reserve refers to a condition very commonly seen in the fertility world, and it refers to the inability of the ovaries to make a lot of eggs. Usually, women with diminished ovarian reserve need to do multiple IVF cycles to find success. And in those IVF cycles, there's usually not a lot of eggs that are available for retrieval or for embryo transfer. Ovarian reserve can be tested on the basis of AMH and antral follicle count. Renee, here you are finally on My Fertility Podcast. Many of you may know Renee Higgins has the.baby.plan on Instagram. So thank you so much for joining us today. There is so much to talk about. We're very excited for this conversation.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
All right, tell us about you, who you are, how did you get here, what led you to this very moment in time on a Monday afternoon interviewing for My Fertility Podcast.
I've had a bit of a crazy fertility journey. It's been 4.5 years of one thing after another. We felt that we were kind of a worst case scenario of worst case scenarios. At first, we were diagnosed with diminished ovarian reserve. So I knew I was running out of eggs, but we didn't know what specific treatments we would need at that point. We tried some medicated cycles, we tried some IUIs, and eventually moved to IVF. So we had done 3 IUIs, 7 IVF cycles in the end. It was a crazy long journey. And at one point, I even walked away from IVF. We were going to pursue other alternatives. And it cost us over $100,000 out of pocket. Yeah, we had 2 losses early on, and it was really traumatic experience. It honestly has totally changed my life. I am not the same person that I was before infertility, that's for sure. And I think I discovered some resilience that I never knew that I had. But I also think I might carry some of the traumas forever for the rest of my life. And I am very happy to say that things finally seem to take a turn in the end. For many years, what kept me going was listening to the success stories of the worst case scenarios. And I still get emotional thinking that I'm now one of those people that others are looking up to as the success story of the worst case scenario because I don't think I ever really believed that was going to happen. I was just kind of going through the motions because it was something I felt I had to cross off the list and that my partner really wanted to see through. So to have it actually work out in the end and to have a miracle IVF cycle was just unreal for us. So in our first 6 IVF cycles, we made 4 embryos. 2 of those resulted in miscarriage, and the other 2 we sent for testing. One of them was abnormal. We had 1 embryo left. We decided we were done IVF and waited a whole year to transfer that embryo, which we just transferred January 2024. I'm currently 19 weeks pregnant, which is still surreal. I can feel the baby moving inside me and I still can't believe it. It's just after all those years of not believing it was going to happen for us, it really is surreal. But probably the craziest part of all was a few days before transfer, I had a ton of follicles growing from the medication that I was on to thicken my lining. And we ended up doing a completely unexpected egg retrieval, a retrieval where we made 5 embryos. We had only made 4 embryos in total in our first 6 IVF cycles. I had 2 IVF cycles where we made no embryos at all. And to have now 5 in one was surreal. I probably would have bet my entire house and livelihood that would never happen for us. And so the fact that it can happen for me after everything that we went through, I really do believe that these kinds of stories are the things that can keep those who still want to fight and still want to pursue treatment have a little hope through the process. And if you're interested in continuing to do treatment, then I think listening to those kinds of success stories can be very inspirational. It certainly was helpful for me. But yeah, I still can't believe that we're here today. And I love to share my story now and see if maybe I can find somebody who is me, that girl who was feeling at the complete worst case scenario, worst case scenarios, getting 1 or 2 eggs retrieved, none fertilized, and then now to have this outcome. I just think people who are really still in it can benefit from hearing that story. And what is unique about my story as well is I live in Northern Ontario in a city called Greater Sudbury, and we don't have any IVF clinics in Northern Ontario. So for most of the procedures, you have to travel to Southern Ontario. And I ended up doing, in the end, probably 50 drives to Toronto there and back. And we would wake up at 3 a.m., drive the 4 hours to Toronto. Sometimes it was 5 hours with traffic or weather, pitch black through snowstorms, spent all that money on gas. And I would do those drives back and forth every 2 days for my monitoring checks until I felt like I just couldn't do it anymore. And then I would bite the bullet and get a hotel closer to retrieval. So even though we did 3 IUIs and 7 IVFs, there were also many months where we tried. We did all the needles. We did all the drives to Toronto. And we just didn't get enough follicles growing for us to decide that it was worth going to retrieval for. It was quite a long haul, over 2 years of doing these things back to back. I think we took like 1 month break. And I really became passionate about that, trying to raise awareness of the Northern Ontario unique circumstances of those people who are having to travel that extra way, the additional barriers to care that exist there. We'll talk about that more later.
Mhm.
But yeah, I, in the end, of course, ended up at Markham Fertility Center, which we had started with a different clinic first and ended up leaving that clinic for personal reasons. And I remember walking into MFC and just feeling right at home. As soon as I walked in, it was a world of difference. Everyone was so friendly and welcoming, and I just felt safe. I don't know how to explain it. It just felt right. And I think another part of my story was finding that fit. I didn't realize that connecting with a clinic and a doctor would be so important for my healing. And I said, even from the beginning, I think very first time I met Dr. Garcia, I said, I know this may not end in success. I know someday this might not work, but I'm looking to find a doctor in a clinic that at the end, when I walk away, one way or the other, I can feel that we tried it all. And that was something that was really important for me because I knew if we had walked away after our first clinic, which had recommended that we walk away from IVF, they had told us, you need to accept you will never have a genetic child. IVF is a waste of your money, and they actually cut us off of IVF. So finding MFC and having that totally different experience, I just knew no matter what happened, I would be at peace with the outcome. And this is something that I like to talk about because we did walk away from IVF. We did decide that no matter what happened with that embryo, that we were going to be done. And coming to that decision was something that would not have been possible if I hadn't done all of the healing that I had done with Dr. Garcia and MFC. So that's my fertility story in a nutshell. 4.5 years condensed, but yeah, it was a crazy journey,
Yeah.
and I learned so much along the way.
It is an amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing it. And there are so many things about the story that I want to talk about. I don't even know where to start because there's so many things there. But first of all, I love the fact that you share it because, and Dr. Weiss can comment on this, the number of patients that tell us whenever they are older or they have decreased ovarian reserve or endometriosis or miscarriages, do you know anyone like me? Have this ever worked for somebody else? And the ability of us to say, yes, actually, I do know people like you. Yes, it has worked for somebody else. It is so powerful. It is more powerful than all the studies that we can quote to our patients.
Mhm.
It is more powerful than anything else when you can look at them in the eye and say, yeah, this has worked for somebody else before, and it can certainly work for you. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
I think in some way, Dr. Garcia and I were vessels in that we collect stories and we collect other people's experiences, and we fill our vessels with these amazing outcomes and these amazing stories from patients, and we pour that back into the other patients. Is that a fair
Yeah,
analogy? What do you think?
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Your story gives us hope and optimism, and then we pour that hope and optimism back into the other patients. And that's why I always tell people, I'm like, please send me the baby pictures. Please send me the success stories. Like, I want to see them. I want to hear about them because that helps me give back.
Yeah, because I mean, in the end, of course, there are studies talking about diminished ovarian reserve and all the things, and that's all. If you're gonna see a patient and be like, well, it's 5%, it's 2%, it's 3%, I always tell patients, what does that matter? It's 100% or 0%. And
Yeah.
the important thing is that you want it, you want to try. That's another thing that I wanted to comment on, and I believe this: the outcome, of course, we all want the perfect outcome for our patients. But as you know, you cannot control that. And that you had an amazing cycle, but I was as surprised as anybody else. I certainly did not have some magic little wand hiding in a drawer that I put out at the last minute for drama. I was very surprised of that amazing cycle. But the important thing is that when a patient, regardless of their situation, or like you're saying, the worst of the worst, if they tell me, I understand, that is my job to make sure they understand that they're not deceiving themselves, that they're not having false hope, that they know exactly what they're doing. But if they say, I understand, I am a grown person, I can make my decisions, and it is my body and my money, and I want to try, then my job is to be like all in and say, I'm going to give you everything I have so that at the end of the day, for both of us, because patients always think, of course, about their journey, but we go on a little bit of a journey with you guys too. So for both of right?
Absolutely. 100%.
You would not believe the tears behind the doors that we shed for our
Yeah.
patients. So at the end of the day, we both need to say, no, this is good and we've tried it. Sometimes when I have those conversations with patients, what I do have to say, I really do think that now it's time to move on. And I never had to had it with you, but I mean, I might have. Then I can feel really comfortable in saying, I'm owning that decision, I'm owning that conversation because I know there was nothing left for both the patient and myself. That's really, really important. And the last thing is like you're saying about the connection, and that is crucial. I think a lot of people downplay that. They think, well, it's just a doctor, all fertility doctors are the same. And it's not about being smart or skilled. I think really most fertility doctors in the UTA are brilliant, but it's just about having that connection. And that connection can happen with any clinic. It doesn't have to be MSc, but you have to find it, right? You have to look for it and you have to find it, whether it's an MSc or a different clinic. I don't think it should be ignored. I think that you should really feel that your clinic and your doctor has your back, that you're trying all the things no matter what, and that you can have honest communication with them, that they're cheering for you. This is not the type of things where you go and you get a prescription and you go away and you never see your doctor again. This is truly a very vulnerable, precious relationship that you have with your fertility doctor, your fertility clinic, your entire team. And I don't think patients should shortchange themselves from having that experience.
I always compare it to, it's kind of like dating in the sense of, you have to have the right pairing between the physician and the patient. All the fertility doctors that I can think of in the Greater Toronto area, they're all fabulous and smart, and they all have lots of successes. They all have gotten lots of patients pregnant. So it's not a question about that. But it's just like in dating, there's lots of like wonderful people out there, but maybe just someone's just not for you, right? Just because the vibe is off. And I think that it's like a vibe check, right? What's their feeling? How do they feel about certain things that I'm really passionate about? How are they going to cheer for me? Are they more research sciencey based? Are they more like emotional and like touchy feely? Are they more like a tough love kind of personality? I think it's that personality type and that personality match that you have to have between the patient, between the physician, especially in cases where they are really challenging. But somebody who comes in, they get pregnant on their first IUI, probably doesn't matter that much, to be honest, in terms of that relationship. Or you only made it to a first date kind of thing, if you will. But for sure, for those longer journeys, and you never know if you're going to be the person that ends up being on the longer journey, right? That's the really, really, really challenging part of it. And so it's like dating, right? There's lots of fish in the ocean. There's lots of fertility.
You gotta find the
They're
right
all
one.
great, but you got to find the right one. Yeah.
I love that. I think a lot of people too, if they end up having their baby, then that clinic is the best clinic. It was the best clinic for them and they made the right decision. And that's wonderful. One thing that I've noticed is a lot of people who tend to leave a clinic tend to go to MFC and they tend to end there. They don't tend to leave again. And I think that that says a lot for the work that you're doing and the connections that you build with patients. I really think that's so important, not to everyone, but to a lot of patients, especially, like Dr. Weiss was saying, if they're going to be in this for the long run, they want to feel that they have a connection. And for me, absolutely, it was important for me to feel that I was valued, I was heard, I had felt like I had an experience out of it that I could walk away and find some peace with no matter what happened. So I love everything you're saying. I think you're nailing it. You're total naturals at this.
That's part of actually one of the reasons why I really wanted to do the podcast, or why I really was interested in participating in doing these Instagram lives, because, like, full disclosure, Dr. Garcia was definitely the instigator.
Not surprised.
Yeah, no, right? What I'm seeing now is that I'm seeing patients who see me, hear me on the podcast. And I always think see me because you guys are seeing me on mid video, but who hear me on the podcast, who see me on the Instagram lives, and now they've already started to get a feel for who I am and for what I'm like. And I think that that helps build that rapport, helps build that relationship. And then now using social media as a way to sort of communicate with patients, is have that opportunity to build that relationship.
So speaking of social media, tell us about Instagram for you. What led you to make an Instagram account and go public and share your journey, and what that has done for you?
Oh, it has done so much for me. It's, in the beginning, did more for me than anyone else, and eventually evolved that I hope it's now a place where it could do some good for others. But basically, what happened was I had done my first IVF cycle, and we had one fertilized egg that cycle. And it really caught me off guard because we had 4 eggs retrieved, and I really thought, "Oh, we'll get 3 or 4 fertilized because that's what the statistics say. Our problem is just diminished ovarian reserve. Everything from here is gonna be great. I'm probably gonna end up with 2 embryos." It really caught me off guard to get that call that we had 1 fertilized. That was definitely a low point for us. Lower than the eggs, because we knew going into the retrieval that we probably were gonna end up with 4, 5, 6 mature eggs. So it was less of a hit to get 4, but to have the 1 fertilized really was tough. And so I was already in a low place. And then we ended up getting that to day 3, and our doctor said, "I feel like this could be your only chance at parenthood. Let's freeze it." So we froze it, transferred it the next month, and ended up getting pregnant. The betas at first were doubling. Everything was great. Actually, like trending way better than my current pregnancy is now. My current pregnancy, out of all 3 of my pregnancies, was probably the one that shouldn't have made it. It was by far my lowest beta. My tests seemed to be getting lighter at one point, and my beta only increased by 62 or 63% at the first rise. And I think a lot of times everybody's always focused on that first number and it needs to double. That's not true. It does not. There is a wide range of normal. I don't have to tell you this. And to have that experience happen to me really helped me believe it. And I never thought that I could end up with a pregnancy trending so much lower than my other ones actually end up with a better outcome. But yeah, that's what happened for us. So just like constant worst case scenarios, crazy stories along the way here. So my betas were doubling and things were looking good. But then we went in for our first ultrasound, the viability ultrasound, and I found out I had a blighted ovum. And we did do a confirmation ultrasound and still no progress. My body actually started miscarrying on its own. And I was already like kind of feeling like highs and lows. Just we're gonna do IVF. It's gonna work the first time for us. I just know it. Oh, we don't really have a lot of eggs, but at least we have 4. And then, oh, we only have 1 fertilized. The embryo's not really looking too great. Transferred it, got pregnant. It was just these crazy lows and highs. It was unreal to go through. And I just needed to talk to somebody who got it. I needed to talk to people who had been through this. And in my personal life, I didn't think that I knew anybody who had been through infertility. I did, but I didn't know it at the time. Let's say that. So I had nobody that I felt that I could talk to about this who would get it and speak my language and, what's an embryo? What does IVF involve? That was what people really wanted to know. But what I wanted to talk about was what I was going through and how hard it was and just have somebody say, "I get that. That is incredibly hard. That happened to me too." And that is what Instagram gave me. So I had been following some other accounts for a little while and I had the idea that, you know what, I really want to make my own. At first, I didn't put my last name, I didn't put my picture. It was like anonymous and I called it the.baby.plan. And it was just meant to be my plan to try to get a baby. And I started connecting with people who had been through it. And that was really a huge turning point for me. Another huge lesson learned on my path. The support system is so important. The doctor is important. Your partner is important. Mental health, resilience, all important. But for me, Instagram gave me something else, and it was talking to people who had been in my shoes, talking to people who had gotten it, finding the success stories of people who had worse outcomes and they turned it around in the end, or they ended up pursuing some other alternative to parenthood, and that kind of helped me find peace with those alternatives. So being able to connect with people across the whole world meant that there was a bigger pool of similar people to me, and being able to find those and search for hashtags that were similar to mine was very healing for me. So my Instagram account originally was about me and healing me and my connections. And as I shared more and more, it just kept growing. It was like, oh, 50 followers. And then I had a 500 followers. And then before I knew it, I had 13,000. It just kept growing. And I think over time, it evolved into people messaging me and saying, "Hey, you've done this a few times. I saw you tried this drug. What was that like?" And before I knew it, I had built all these connections, and I think it turned into a tool to try to help other people as well. Talking about fights with your partner, or being able to sleep at night, having nightmares, and worrying about work performance, or how do you tell your boss, and just talking about the kinds of things that are not medical necessarily, but you don't have anyone else to talk to unless you talk to someone who's been through it. That's what the Instagram account gave to me, and what I hope it will give to others as well. Try to give back to this incredible community that has given me so much support.
Mhm. I have to say, when you decided to come and see me, you made a post on Instagram before you met me and tagged me. And you're like, I know I'm going to
Creepy.
come. And I was like, oh boy.
Oh, yeah, problem coming my way. Little stalker here. Well, it was funny because we knew we wanted to switch clinics at this point, and I'm going to interview 3 clinics, and I had my list, and who should I go to? And overwhelmingly, I kept seeing MFC, MFC. So I'm like, okay, I want to check out their Instagram account. And then I go, and you happen to both be doing a live that night.
Mhm.
And it was unreal because earlier that day, I had met with my previous doctor and I was talking about wanting to try lower doses to save money and just see what would happen. And then there you were talking about mini IVF and low dose IVF. And I was like, hey, I guess it's not such a crazy idea. I think there's a lot, honestly, that science doesn't yet know. But for me, possibly total coincidence, my lowest dose cycles were by far my best. And, my 3 high dose cycles, we made 1 embryo for all 3 of those. And then my 3 low dose cycles that made it to retrieval, we made 8. I have to count them. That's how many there are. Can't even fit it on one hand.
Right.
So maybe it was all luck, but it was just something I really wanted to try. And it was part of my, in order to move on, whether I'm going to other alternatives or seeing this through, I just needed to try it. And I needed to find a doctor who was willing to try it with me. I had seen other people talking about it, and saving the money on the meds meant that we were able to do more IVFs in the end as well. So that was really great win for us. But yeah, so I saw you doing your live and I was just starstruck. I don't know, I just got attached and we didn't even end up interviewing the other 2 clinics. I was just like, that's our doctor.
That's so funny. I had no idea about that part of the story,
Yeah.
that you happened to chance onto the Instagram live that happened to be happening right at that moment. First of all, I think it's worth saying, like, Dr. Garcia and I, we do love a good MinStem IVF cycle.
Oh, yes.
For sure. And I think it's worth saying that I can think of many patients who've had similar experience in the sense of you do the high dose stim and you do worse, you do the low dose stim and you end up doing better. I mean, so I know we are both big proponents of that one for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, especially for DOR. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, you're now pregnant. How do you feel that your Instagram account is changing, or do you have a sense of the direction in which you want to go from here?
That's a great question because it's something that I'm struggling with a lot right now. I'm very aware that when I post a bump photo on my story, that somebody might see that and be at a low point in their journey or having a bad day and it can throw them off. And so I'm struggling a bit. I'm not going to lie. I'm struggling with the content to share. And I'm trying to make it a mix of my pregnancy, life updates, advocacy stuff. And I would like to see it evolve into IVF tips, for lack of a better word, like things that I wish I knew. Silly little things like traveling with meds. I went to a golf tournament and I was all worried about having to bring my trigger shot into this RBC Canadian Open golf tournament. Like, are they going to let me in with a needle? Do I have to leave it in the box? And it has to be refrigerated. Like, what do? I had to get a little ice pack. So just figuring all these things out, non-medical tips, even just things mentally that you go through and how to process those things, or things to think about when you're looking for an IVF clinic. I would love to see that kind of stuff. The PIO needles. There's so many things people say that didn't work for me. All that worked for me was just getting through the first week and a half. All 3 times that I did it, the first week and a half, I thought, I'm strong, but I'm not this strong. I am not going to make it through this. And then it started to get better. So I think just talking about things like that on my account would give me a sense of satisfaction and be kind of what my audience is looking for. But yeah, I'm trying to share little pregnancy updates too, because I know there are a lot of people who have chosen not to mute my stories or unfollow me because they want to see the success story through. And
Mhm.
they do get some level of inspiration from that. So I'm trying to take it in that direction.
Well, I think you said something at the beginning, which is that the infertility trauma will probably stay with you forever. And I
Mhm.
think you're absolutely right. And I know from personal experience as well. And a lot of people think you struggle to get pregnant, you're pregnant, you have a baby, and you live happily ever after, and everything is rainbows and roses after that. But that's not true. In reality, many times after having a baby, people with infertility are increased risk of postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, like feeling like I'm not even supposed to be a mother, that they're going to take it away from me. All of those things, I can't speak for you, but I think you might find that as you transition into early motherhood, there is a lot of things there that might be really good to share because many, many times patients have gone through fertility just feel so alone because they think I'm supposed to be so happy now. I got what I wanted. I have a healthy baby. What is wrong with me? Why am I still thinking about my journey? Why am I still not happy? Why am I so worried? Why am I so anxious? What's wrong with me? So I think that would be another thing that you might want to share if that's your experience.
No, I love that. And honestly, I already have felt some of it. I feel imposter syndrome because I spent so many years processing, I'm not going to have a baby. And I need to move on to other alternatives. We're wasting our money repeating conversations with that first doctor that told us we should move on. And just, I think it was really difficult for me to, even still today, accept that it's real. I'm still uncomfortable with the idea of anybody hosting a baby shower for me. And I don't think that's normal. I think that came from my infertility experience. I feel like an imposter, a fake. It's so weird as the baby's kicking inside me. I would say I felt this weirdness at my first miscarriage before I even had losses. Like, just pregnancy after infertility was overwhelming. And is it real? But it got a little worse every time. My second loss, I bought some maternity clothes. It felt like we got a little further along. It felt a little safer. And then this one, it wasn't until after we had like our 12-week scan that I even opened up my box of stuff that I had from my first two pregnancies. And 16 weeks, somebody asked me, "What have you bought for the baby?" And I was like, "Not a single thing. Is that not normal?" I didn't realize that is not common. So, yeah, I'm still kind of figuring it out and discovering things. I found myself always thinking to next milestone, I'll feel safe. Next
Right.
milestone, it'll all be good, rainbow butterflies, but that's not how things have played out. I found myself constantly waiting for the next milestone and feeling like really great boost for a few days and then back at it. It's definitely a very challenging place to be. And I think very important to talk about that those feelings are normal, that they're common, that it's okay to talk about them and to seek out help for the way you're feeling because mental health is so important for so many reasons. And there's a lot of hormone stuff happening when you're pregnant too that I'm sure is playing a role in it.
Yes, for sure. So you went through this crazy infertility story, then you got on Instagram and made this amazing community, and you're not done. There is so much more that you're doing. So tell us about your advocacy work.
Yeah, that's honestly has been the most healing for me. And it's not for everybody, but for me, advocacy was a huge turning point. So there was finding you, and then my Instagram account and advocacy. Those were the three things that really helped me on my journey with coping with what I was going through. And advocacy evolved from my infertility account and hearing all the stories of so many people who were messaging me saying, "How did you afford IVF? I can't even afford like the free cycle, the funded cycle in Ontario because my doctor says I might need 10 grand or more for meds and testing and things that are not covered." And it just broke my heart. How many people are going through infertility in Ontario, some that have never even spoken to a fertility doctor because they know they won't be able to afford it. And it's just mind blowing. And I don't know that the statistics actually would reflect all that. I don't know if we know how many people are not pursuing treatment because of financial reasons. But Conceivable Dreams, which is the Ontario fertility patient nonprofit advocacy group, did do a fertility patient survey to try to capture some of those statistics. And it was crazy how many people had said that they had spent over $50,000 out of pocket. There was a lot of people who said they had to travel over 5 hours to get to their nearest clinic. There are people I've spoken to in the far north of Ontario that are an 18-hour drive to the nearest IVF clinic. And so there are a lot of people struggling and not a lot of people talking about it. And finally, I just said, I need to do something. I feel like I want to play a bigger role in trying to make change happen. And I started off with little things. And this is where I always encourage people to start when they say, how can I get involved? How can I help make a difference? And I say, start small. Write a letter to your HR department. It could even be anonymous if you don't want to put your last name, just put your first name or put nothing at all, or put your name if you're okay with it, because generally HR departments are trustworthy and confidential. And talk about your workplace benefits, because we're seeing more and more employers in Ontario that are becoming aware of these things, starting to cover the fertility drugs, some even starting to cover the IVF procedures. Not as many as I think in the US yet, but we're starting to see some improvements. And I think the letter to HR is an easy, small step, can be done in a few hours. There's some templates online as well. You can write a letter to your MP or meet with them and tell them about your experience and how they hopefully will advocate for change, since they are the ones who have the power to change these policies at the provincial level. I did an interview with a local journalist, which ended up in my local paper. That was a little braver because now everybody at work knows. But you could do it anonymously as well. If you just want to say, I'm Renee from Sudbury, you could do something like that. Mine eventually evolved into radio. I started doing live radio segments for these radios all over Ontario, and it blew my mind how much they trusted me. I was just this random girl, and they called me up and or found me on Instagram and got my number from someone. Can you come on our radio show in 2 days? And it was crazy. They just called me, switchboard, I'm live. But that evolved into a live national interview, which was surreal. And I also did a longer segment partnering with Dr. Garcia and Markham Fertility Center, which ran on CBC earlier this year, and that one was very well received. I know was aired on national television, and I know it reached the highest levels of government. And this is how we make change happen at the wider national level. So there's all these different levels. There's the national, there's the provincial, there's the local, there's your employers. So trying to hit up all those different places at the same time is not a one person job. And there are a lot of people advocating, because eventually they got to the point that I did where they realized I am interested in playing a bigger role, and they found a place to start and just kind of kept going with whatever felt comfortable to them. So advocacy for me has been huge, helping others and trying to make difference happen. I hope that someday I get to say that I got to make a big difference in something. I know I've made some smaller changes move forward, and really hoping I can make a real difference for Ontarians and Canadians. But most recently, I joined the board of directors with Conceivable Dreams. And through that, I'm able to have conversations at government. We had an advocacy day at Queen's Park, which is really cool, in late 2023. And if anyone's ever interested in getting involved and doesn't know where to start, I would encourage them to reach out to Conceivable Dreams. They do have a website and an Instagram account, IVF4 on, so the number 4, and they'd be happy to connect you with resources or point you in the right direction. And there are lots of people trying to make change happen. And I know Dr. Garcia and many at MFC are some of those change makers. So thank you very much for everything you're doing as well.
That's amazing that you're doing that. I learned about Conceivable Dreams through you, actually, and I got involved through your involvement as well. I can echo it's a great organization with an amazing board of directors. There are other physicians there involved as well. So, yes, we're all trying to improve access for fertility treatments for everyone in Ontario. So, having been through everything that you've been through, what advice would you give to someone who is in the thick of it right now?
Find your support system. It's so important. And for me, the Instagram community was that source. And what works for me is different than what would work for other people. But I think the Instagram community is a wonderful place to start because you have a wide breadth and depth of personalities on there, and you're more likely to find someone that is going through something similar to you and thinks like you. I have made lifelong friendships from that community. I've gotten to meet and hang out with some of the individuals that I met on there, which was super powerful. And we do have in person meetup events sometimes too, which for me was really fun. The second thing that I would say is focus on the things that are where you wanna be. So what I mean by that is when I was in the thick of it doing IVF and we already paid the bill between the needles, like, I'm full commit at this point, I don't wanna go and Google negative stories. I wanna surround myself with hope and success stories of people who have been through something similar to me, because if it doesn't work, I have the rest of my life to grieve that. So in this moment, going through the thick of it, I'm already through all this stress. I decided I'm gonna focus on where I need to be. And where I needed to be changed at all phases of my IVF cycles and treatment cycles. Sometimes I was in a failed cycle, and where I needed to be was talking to people who had failed cycles and how they processed it. And at one point, I decided to walk away from IVF. And at that point, I was reading books and podcasts and talking to people online who had pursued alternative paths to parenthood so that I could help myself find peace with that. Sometimes I get messages from people on Instagram and they're saying, my beta is really low. And I Googled it and low beta bad and found all this stuff. And don't, Google low beta success stories. Talk to people online who have had them because they are out there. And if you're looking for the bad stuff, then that's all you're going to find. And it's not going to put you in a great mental place. So I think that searching out where you want to be is really important as well.
Because of your Instagram page being so popular, a lot of patients at MFC and other clinics are obviously following you along, and you've had this incredible cycle that led to your current success. A lot of patients who are listening to this podcast are going to want to know what the secret sauce was, what the secret story was, right? That I think is a big question that people are asking right now in their minds. I guess this is a question for you and Dr. Garcia. So would you guys share what the secret sauce was?
Let me just start off by saying, I wish I knew. I wish there was something that I did that was different, that there was some secret, easy solution, repeatable recipe. My personal opinion is that it was complete luck. I mean, a combination of Dr. Garcia's skill in designing a protocol and making the calls that she did for sure. The lab obviously pulled off miracles, but definitely luck. I think that to go from my 6th IVF cycle, we had no embryos, to my 7th one a year later, having 5. And I think I forgot to mention this at the beginning of the episode, but we actually sent them for PGT testing, and all of them are usable embryos. None of them were fully abnormal. There was one that was a low level mosaic segmental, so almost perfect, and then the other 4 perfect. I feel like luck has to play some part in that. And I do follow a lot of people on Instagram, and I'm sure Dr. Garcia will have something to add here, but I see it a lot. I see it a lot where somebody will do 4 IVF cycles, same protocol, and then the 5th time they do it, all of a sudden they have 3 embryos after getting none in the ones before. And I don't know how it happens. I think there's something science can't explain yet, but I think that that's an important part of the story because that's kind of a piece that gives you hope too, right?
Yes, I agree. I mean, we were trying to thicken your lining for an embryo transfer. We were not trying to do another IVF. Your lining had been a problem in the past. We knew we couldn't do a medicated cycle. We knew we couldn't do a natural cycle. So I know that because I had done IVF before, I knew that with the particular combination of low dose protocols, which is what we had done, we could at least get that lining to thicken. So that's what we did. It was a low dose. I think it was like Gonalef 150.
Yeah,
I
that's
remember
it.
correctly. There was no growth hormone added. There was no
Mhm.
letrozole. We just wanted the lining. And then all of a sudden, I'm doing my flow sheets and I'm like, she's got 5 follicles. And I'm thinking we should convert her to IVF. But now she had already said, I'm at peace with my
I'm
journey.
done.
I am done. I'm going to do this transfer and that's it. And the last thing that I wanted was to open up that kind of worm. So I really struggle actually with, do I pick up the phone and say, maybe we should retrieve them? And then she sends me an email saying, I'm really sorry to email you. I don't know how to say this. I know I told you I didn't want to do more, but do you think that maybe, possibly, maybe, like in any possible way, can we do a retrieval? And I reply back, I'm on the floor laughing because that is exactly what I'm thinking about at this very point that I'm receiving your email.
I thought you were gonna be mad for some reason. I was like, I feel bad. I'm like changing up the whole.
And I'm glad that you wrote the email because I was really struggling with, do I open that kind of worm for you? Because I know you were at peace, right? And I didn't know
Yeah.
if that cycle really was going to be great. And am I going to make it worse for you because you were at peace? And now I'm bringing you back into the IVF world. And what if the outcome isn't great and it's all my fault? Yeah, it was a lot that was going through my head, but we're both on the same page. You sent me an email, I replied back saying that is exactly what I'm thinking. And then I came to do your retrieval, and it was just literally like 1, 2, 3. There was nothing to it. And then the next day is like they all fertilized. And then it's like they all made it to day 3. And like
What is
they all
happening?
made it to blastocyst. And we were just in complete
Yeah.
awe.
Yeah. I have to tell you the other side of the story, Dr. Garcia. I was never going to change my mind. It was my partner that really convinced me when we had so many antral follicles, so many follicles growing close together, better than we had ever had before. There was just a beautiful cohort there. And yeah, I don't know. We never would have changed our mind if it wasn't looking like an amazing cohort of follicles all growing close together. If it had been the same as before, we wouldn't have done it for sure. And I think you made the right decision in not reaching out because you knew that I would change my mind if I wanted to. So I think you made the right call. And I can understand how that must have been difficult for you too, to sit there thinking what do I do? Should I tell her? Should I not? So thanks for giving us that space. I totally think it was the right call. And obviously, it all worked out. Miracle of miracles, cycle. I still cannot believe it. People message me and I'm like, what? Oh, yeah, we have those embryos frozen still. So crazy.
I never buy into this idea of relax and you'll get pregnant. But I
No.
do think that you had so much peace. There is something
Yeah.
about finding peace. And I'm not saying that when you find the peace, you finally get what you want. I can't explain it, but I just see it so many times. There is something about finding that moment when you are like, no matter what happened, I've got me. I'm okay. And I can do this. And I have a plan for a beautiful life regardless. That is very hard to get to because I know when I was going through my
Yeah.
journey, I was not there on day 1. I was not there in year 3 or year 4. I got there in year 10. But I mean, I got there and I know what that is like. And one of the things that I love about this is seeing patients get there too and helping them get there. I feel like I'm a bit of their cheerleader when they want it, but also helping them find that moment of peace where no matter what, I've got me. Right. And that's a beautiful thing. If that is what led to your success, then I don't know. I can't say, but I do think that it is such a good place to be when you're going there and not an easy place to get to. It takes years.
Oh, yeah.
It takes years to get there. So if anybody doesn't feel like they're there now, give yourself a break. It really does take a long time to come to that point.
I agree. I think it was 3.5 years
Mhm.
of infertility before I finally felt like maybe I can find some peace in an alternative path than I had envisioned. Maybe this isn't going to work out for us and we'll be okay. And I feel like that really was a turning point for me in being able to start healing from some of the traumas that I had been through. And it was one of the reasons why we took so long to transfer our last embryo, why we wanted to wait that year. I thought, honestly, if somebody had come to me one day and said, you're going to have an embryo in 4 years, you're going to spend $100,000, and then you're going to wait a year to transfer it, I would have laughed in their face. No, when can I transfer that embryo, right? So it was a totally different shift in my thinking and healing for sure. I don't know if it made any impact on my outcomes. I think it's very interesting that there were so many months when I took all those supplements, hundreds of dollars of supplements, and I felt like I was doing all the things, read all the books, did all the advice, and had my poorest cycles. And then when I had peace with things and felt like, you know what, things might be okay no matter what happens, and I feel like we're giving it our all, that I started having these really great cycles, and that our best cycle of all was the one where I was on no supplements other than prenatals. Still blows my mind. I think a lot of people think, well, you got to take the supplements and have the diet, and get these messages too that are really heartbreaking. Like, I had a piece of ice cream cake last night and my embryo transfer is happening today. Do you think I ruined it? I'm like,
Yeah. Oh,
no,
no, we
No,
get
you have
those
no
questions
idea
all the
what I
time.
did.
we get those all the time.
Yeah. Or I had a glass of wine 2 weeks ago. You're
Yeah,
like,
it's
is my
heartbreaking.
retrieval doomed? And I just love, 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 love this story so much because I think it's so important to highlight that as much as we try and as much as we know about CoQ10 and vitamin D and omega 3s and growth hormone and all this, there's so much that we don't know. And a lot of it is sometimes the stars just have to align. Sometimes it's just a matter of the right cohort of follicles that happen to grow in that correct cycle. And that there is still so much that's still so unpredictable in this crazy fertility world.
Yeah.
My last question for you is I asked you what advice would you give to somebody going through infertility in the thick of it, but I also want to hear what do you want to tell fertility doctors?
Ooh, I had lots
What
to
would you
say.
want them to know? Go ahead, we can take it.
I know you can. Two things. The first one is that conversation about alternatives is so delicate. It's so hard to do well. And I think that you do a wonderful job at it, Dr. Garcia, because you and I had it. But it is very hard. And it is one of the things that I know caused me a lot of unnecessary additional stress and trauma in my process. I had a previous doctor at a first clinic was telling me you should walk away from IVF. You're a lost cause. You need to accept you're never going to have a genetic child. We're refusing to treat you any longer, even though you want to keep going. Your success rates are too low. We don't treat people with low success rates like that. And it really, really was difficult for me when I had already decided I wanted to keep going no matter what. And I think basically you have to be an expert at reading the person and what is that person feeling? What do they want to hear right now? And I can appreciate it's an impossible balance to find because I also get messages from people who say, I can't believe my doctor didn't tell me about donor eggs a long time ago. So I can only imagine how hard it must be as physicians to find that balance. But if my first doctor had read a little earlier on, like, oh, that's not working, and shifted her approach, that maybe it would have been easier for me longer term, that I wouldn't have repeated those words 1,000 times in my head since that day. It's very, very traumatizing to some people who are not ready for it. So that's one thing. And the second thing I will say is I find it very difficult having an Instagram account where people want to message me medical questions. And it's very challenging because I don't wanna answer them because I don't know the answer to them. I'm not the best person to be answering them, right? Their doctor is the best person to be answering that. I don't know their case. I don't have any medical training or background. I just know my own story and the stories I've heard of others. So they'll literally send me like, "Here's my protocol." I don't know anything about you. I've never heard of that drug in my life, as a matter of fact. And I think the symptom that I'm seeing is that sometimes patients are afraid to ask their doctors questions. And advocacy was something that I learned on my journey. Probably I was one of those people earlier on myself, but trying to create that safe space and, do you have any other questions? Is there anything that's unclear? Is there anything that I can help you with? And I always appreciated that Dr. Garcia would take the time to hear my questions out. There was times when I was like, "I think we should try this." And she would gently be like, "No, honey, no." And then sometimes I'd be like, "I really want to try this." And she'd say, "Well, the science isn't there, the evidence is there, but if you feel like you really need to do it, I don't think it could hurt." And then I'd be like, "Oh, okay, I don't really want to do it then." So you have a way for sure of giving people that level of comfort. My advice to physicians is to really spend time on that. The medical and clinical skills are so, so important. Yeah. But so are the people skills, especially in the fertility space where people are going through a lot of trauma and may not have support systems available to them where they can talk to people the way they can talk to you. You are so important. You're a huge part of the puzzle, the biggest piece potentially. And I think you can leverage that to your advantage to provide that fulsome, treatment package to patients, the physical and the mental because they definitely go hand in hand in the fertility space.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. That's great.
You've already nailed it, though. So it's not advice for you.
No, but it's always good to keep that in mind. When I meet with patients, I'm always thinking about giving them space. That's what I really believe, that I'm a mirror of who they are and what they believe. And when I meet new patients, I go, okay, so your age, your cycles, your history, everything. And then when I get to the end, I said, okay, now the most important question, who are you? Tell me who you are. Tell me what you believe
Love that.
in. Tell me what are your worst fears? What are you bringing? What are you holding on to? And then the answers to those questions are, there's so much variety. Sometimes they go, I just want to be pregnant. What kind of a question is that? And I get that, where they're like, I don't know, I want to have a baby. Like, that's why I'm here. But sometimes they tell me, I come from a family of 10. Everybody else is pregnant and having kids. I'm the only one. I can't go to any more events. I can't take it anymore. Or my partners and I are fighting all the time. And that, getting to know every story, it's different. Every fertility journey is different. And for me, finding that thing that makes them tick, that uniqueness, like for you, it was your prior experience. It was coming from Sudbury. It was your advocacy, but everybody has that uniqueness to them. And sometimes I get it on the first appointment. They share with me openly, and I'm like, I nail it. I know who they are. Sometimes I don't, and it takes multiple appointments to get there. And sometimes they never open up to me, and they just want the treatment and the drugs and be on their way. And that's also perfectly okay as well.
Very, very incredible advice. You make a really good point that when you are talking about a fertility doctor, the one thing you didn't talk about was, I want the doctor with the highest pregnancy rates or with the most publications or who goes to the most fancy conferences, right? Which is so telling about what people are really looking for, and that it's not necessarily sometimes things that we pride ourselves in as a fertility physician. That's really about those relationships and building those bonds, and building that rapport is infinitely more important. You hit the nail on the head. It is really hard sometimes to get a sense of, when do I start broaching these difficult topics with patients? Because on one hand, you can say, yes, I think it's time to start thinking about donor eggs. And then people turn around and get pregnant. How spontaneous. And so you're always walking that fine line of, we should start thinking about this. But it doesn't mean that this is completely impossible or off the table or whatever. I mean, we've all seen those stories where we had thought we were going to need to do IVF, that they were never going to get pregnant spontaneously, and then they do, right? So I think it's about trying to learn how to broach these subjects in a way that's not black or white, right? Nothing is an absolute. I personally tend to start talking about these things a little bit earlier in a very offhanded way, in the sense of, some patients will think about this. Some patients will think about this. Some patients ask me this, or you may have heard about this. I'm just going to leave this there. I'm going to tell you about this. You don't need to tell me what your feelings are, but just let it percolate. I want this to be somewhere in the back of your mind so that you know that this is a plan S or G or M, or wherever it is for you, and then I don't expect them to say anything. I just give a very general spiel, let's say, and then I say, okay, take that information with you, and then you can see where it goes.
I love that approach. I think that's really nice, and kind of speaks to what Dr. Garcia did with me too. Giving the patient, you to make sure that they know about the option so that they can reach out to you if they're ready to learn more about it. And that's beautiful. I think that's a wonderful approach.
Thank you so much, Renee, for coming to my fertility podcast, and for sharing your story on Instagram, and for your advocacy work, and for being such a source of hope and inspiration for so many people.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful. I love your podcast. Keep it up.
Just to echo Dr. Garcia's sentiments, thanks so much for joining us. This has been a fabulous conversation touching on those things, but then also really educational as a fertility doctor. And so getting more information, more idea, hearing more from the patient's perspective, it's always eye-opening for me, and I always learn something.
And thanks for helping to make the embryo that I'm currently pregnant with.
Like, when people say it takes a village right from the beginning, before you even think it takes a village.
It truly does. There's so many people involved.
And that's a wrap for today, Superhumans.
If you're looking to connect, get social with us. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at My Fertility Podcast, or visit us online at markandfertility.com. And don't forget, follow, subscribe, and share your favorite episode.
Thanks for listening to My Fertility Podcast and for being a vital part of our community. We know you've got this.
We're signing off until next Tuesday.
If you found this episode of My Fertility Podcast helpful, please take a moment to head over to the review section and leave us your thoughts. Your reviews and comments are incredibly valuable to us and help guide future episodes. We also welcome you to direct your questions to info@myfertilitypodcast.com.
My Fertility Podcast is produced by Rabbit Media Inc. in conjunction with Dr. Garcia and Dr. Weiss. Music from Mix Kit Raising Me Higher by Ajay Stelino. My Fertility Podcast is not intended to replace any type or variation thereof professional medical, health, or legal advice, nor should the content be taken as medical advice. Please contact your primary healthcare professional regarding any medical questions you may have. The information presented in this podcast is based on the knowledge and understanding of the host at the time of recording. Medical knowledge is constantly evolving, and new research may change the understanding of health-related topics. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, we do not guarantee the completeness, accuracy, or timeliness of the content. The views expressed in this podcast by guests are not those of the host or the management. This podcast is not intended to impose any type of discrimination. My Fertility Podcast and its management are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast.